Right. So as part of Guidewire Insurance Suite, right, which is a cloud version, right? So we must be knowing about what are the different cloud API requests that we have. So cloud APIs we are using because in general we are using RESTful API, all that in the legacy Guidewire applications. But when it comes to the cloud API request or concern, generally this request architecture, which standardizes the integration through RESTful, we are using the same RESTful API, right? So because Open Swagger API is also been inbuilt in the Guidewire application. So wherein first of all, we must be knowing about the RESTful part, right? So RESTful foundation, I can say RESTful part, which is majorly a scalable and decoupled one, because whenever we are working on the cloud APIs, which majorly separate the presentation layer, as in when I mentioned earlier, right? So from any kind of business logic, this must allow whatever the scaling of integration that we are performing, or the kind of traffic that we are performing, etc. So it should not be impacting the UI performance. So user interface performance should remain intact, and whatever the required independent scaling of integration we wants to be performed based upon the traffic. Either it can be because sometimes claims data will be more, okay, so claim submissions will be more, where which has to be identified and it has to be performed. So this integration traffic has to be streamlined, so without impacting the UI performance. So scalable decoupling has to be performed. That is one. Next, it is can be standardization, because building on open API specifications and all, whatever the request that we are initiating, so this has to follow the consistent naming conventions. Like we are using XML earlier, and now even at the same time we are using some JSON structures and all, including any error handling patterns, right? So everything can be performed across all modules. So these are the reasons why RESTful still now, even in the on-premise or the cloud environment, we were using. Now, when we try to understand the anatomy of a request, generally there are the payload components, right? Because whenever there is any cloud API request that we are initiating, so it's a basic front, because everybody knows that, but people who are new to this environment will be useful to them, right? So generally, when it comes to the cloud API request, consists of three critical parts that we can define, right? So either it can be client side, because client is sending a request to the server, right? So the server is providing the response, right? So both synchronous and asynchronous process being initiated. So in that, there are three critical parts that we can see. One is about URI endpoint, which defines the resources and the same time target versions, etc. So at the same time header, right? So which includes authentication tokens, right? So content type, checking sums for any ETIAX, for any concurrencies, etc. Everything being used for the headers. The third about body, right? So wherein whatever the JSON formatted data graphs that we are containing resource attributes, everything are being used. So these are the three critical parts that we can see whenever we are working on the cloud API. So these are the three major payload components that we use whenever we are working on the cloud API part. Now, when it comes to the request methods and all, because this is something that we can see it in RESTful API, because when we follow the SOAP API, it's not, because SOAP API is strong even. It's a traditional protocol based API that we are using since ages, since earlier even. But now when we are transformed into RESTful API is being delivered through methods. There are different methods that we can see. So get method, post method, patch, delete, all that. So the same thing you do it in the traditional on-premise Guidewire only. The same thing will be followed over here, because get method is being used to retrieve the resources of data. At the same time, it also supports all the query parameters, right? So for filtering or sorting, all that kind of. Next, post method is being used to create any new resources, right? So for example, when there is any policy submissions we are doing, or any claim lodgements, or any adding any sub entities, etc. So this is post. So that post method is used to create new resources. Patch method is something used to perform partial updates, means any changes you are making, right? So if you want to modify some specific attributes with the existing objects, etc. So patch method is being used in that. Last but not least, delete, right? So because if you want to remove any resources, right? So or if you want to remove any temporary data or draft entities, etc. So delete method can be used. So these are the four different methods that we are using in RESTful API, right? So because again, I'm repeating, it is nothing to do with SOAP, because in SOAP API, when we are using, we don't find these methods. When we are working on RESTful API, so we can use get method, post, patch, delete method, all that stuff. When it comes to the secure authentication itself is concerned, we are using even not only for Guidewire applications, even for any Java based applications also. We are using Oath 2.0 at the same time. Oath 2.0 along with JWT, we are using it because JSON web tokens we are using. So because if you want to ensure any role based access control for some people to perform, and also we need to have a secure identity federation hub, right? So that we can use it for that. Along with this, any digital signatures like any JWTs and all, so that we can validate the caller's identity permissions. So that when there is any kind of data that we are performing or any kind of insurance suit perimeters that we are using, so digital signatures and AWS can be validated. So these are all for secure authentications once has to be used for. Next, performance metrics, wherein, as I already told you, so it has average response time was that. So this performance metrics can be improved as well. That's not it. But when it comes to the request response lifecycle is concerned, the structure as follows. For example, if there is any request that we are sending JSON payload with any authentication token, etc. So system has to check the schema, including the permissions and checksums as part of the validation side that. Next, whenever we are moving on to the core logic updates and all in the database or any executes the services, execution will be taken place. Finally, response will be given, JSON response will be given, including any kind of status code returns, etc. So this can be given even here. So this is a request and response cycle, as I already shown you here, right? So for example, here you can see request is sent by the client to the server, wherein you are getting the response from the server to the client, right? So synchronous, both synchronous and asynchronous process, the performance can be. So this is the structure one should be knowing. Now, when we try to understand about the comparison of API request, etc., so one is about the source of capability, where when we are working on system APIs in the earlier, not only earlier, even now on-premise services, when we use system APIs and all, it's out-of-box Guidewire one. But when it comes to the extension APIs, which are customer defined one. As far as the capabilities of updates are concerned, earlier it was automatic with releases. Now manual maintenance can be done using extension APIs. As far as the compliance is concerned, it's a pre-validated for cloud environment for system API. But now for extension APIs and all, it requires validation to be performed. In the cloud, pre-validation happens over there. As far as the use cases are concerned, for system API and all, we are using standard policy claim operations. But for extension APIs and all, we are using customer LOBs or integrations, all this. These are the API request scopes that we are using in context to the comparisons, etc., all that. So this is how we must be knowing whenever we are working on the cloud environment, especially on the Google Cloud environment, when we try to understand about cloud API request, etc. This is what something one should be knowing.